Hi, it's oh yeah, the audio started. It's 10 o'clock our time. Let's get going. Hi, my name is Joel Coleman and I'm on the Apex team. And thanks for joining us today for Apex office hours. My office today is my den, probably like most of you. Today we're joined by Karsten Zarski from Munich, Germany, who is a brilliant developer on the Apex product development team. And he will cover the new form region in Apex 19. It's probably one of the most underappreciated but spectacular new features in Apex. You can feel free to ask questions via Q&A in the Zoom, and they'll be addressed by our team. And we'll also save some questions for Karsten towards the end, please. So just a couple quick updates. These are extraordinary times we're living in, and this is also a time that's crying for novel information management systems or opportunistic apps. And I believe we as a community are better equipped than anyone else on the planet to help deliver. As I wrote on my personal blog yesterday, I strongly encourage you to proactively reach out to your local clinic or hospital or doctor or researcher and tell them that you can write the system that they need for free. Maybe it's managing supplies or tracking patients or probably 1,000 other things. And you're a talented lot, and you should offer your services immediately to others. You should make yourself known today. Anthony Rayner on our team also made me aware of the website helpwithcovid.com, and I'll try and put this in the chat if I can to everyone, all panelists and attendees. And this has nothing to do with Apex per se, but this is an opportunity for you to find where you can contribute wherever you are around the globe. Lastly, a lot of the conferences for the Apex community have been canceled, and people are a bit forlorn or sad. But it's the Apex community to the rescue once again. So some leaders in the Apex community are organizing something called Apex at Home. And this will be a 24-hour nonstop conference beginning at midnight Eastern Time on Thursday, April 2nd. This will include many of the top tier speakers from around the globe from these same conferences that many of you were hoping to attend. We at Oracle, we're helping to facilitate this and host it and record it, but this is really being orchestrated by members of the Apex community, and we just wish to help. And I'll put in the chat here as well for some select cities around the globe. This is going to start at midnight Eastern Time on effectively April 2nd, and that would be 0400, 4 a.m. UTC on April 2nd. And we hope you can enjoy this. Enjoy us. You can expect some announcements and a schedule of topics and presenters in the next few days, but please do put this on your calendar. Again, April 2nd, starting at 0400 UTC. And with that, let me please pass this over to Karsten. Oh, hey, Karsten, you're muted. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Joel. Welcome also from my side to this office hours session about the form region. I was intrigued to say the new form region, but honestly, it's not so new anymore since we introduced that today's topic with Apex 19, so even 19.1. So many of you have the opportunity to use the new form region today, to start with it today and to explore the features today. So let me share my screen and let's jump into the topic. So the session is named Forms Reloaded, the new form region in Apex 19. So we will cover about the intentions, why we introduced that new form region. And there are a few very obvious changes. When you have a look at the new form region and page designer, there are a few things which you notice almost immediately, and other things are not so obvious, right? And I will try to cover those as well. First, a few words about my person. Very briefly, my name is Carsten Sarski. I'm with Oracle since 2001, and the first 15 years I was a part of pre-sales in Germany, where I collected some experience regarding with working with customers and partners in Germany regarding all sorts of application development. And 4 years ago, in March 2016, there was the opportunity to change to the Apex team. And since then, I'm working on Apex product development, on web source modules, REST-enabled SQL, data loading, and I also did a lot of work together with Patrick Wolf on this new form region. If you want to contact me, there is my email address, and I'm also tweeting here and there about things which touch my personal areas of interest, and my Twitter handle is Czarski. Okay. As always, this is an Oracle presentation, so if I by chance talk about some future directions which are not there as a product, it's all safe harbor, and things at the end may turn out different. Okay, so what do we have for today? So I will first touch a bit on what's new in the new form region. I would like to demo that new form region to you. And that will already show the most obvious changes. We will then have a look into the anatomy of such a form page, and we will look into what's different between old form pages and new form pages. A lot of not so obvious differences affect page items, right? So we will have a look into those as well. And finally, we will cover on how to migrate an old form region or old form page to the new form page, and we will cover a few tips and tricks. Okay, so let's start. And the best way to approach the new form region is to try it out. And let me do that. I have prepared an empty application over here. And let me enlarge the screen a bit, make the font a bit larger for everybody to read. And so let's now just create a new form page, right? As usual, we would use the wizard for this. So we will create a form. And I would like to very easily edit existing rows. So for this demo, to report and form is the most appropriate example. And yeah, let me add a report page and a form page. Let's take a modal dialog. Interactive report for the report is fine for now. Yes, we want to have a navigation menu entry. And now this is the first difference in 19.1 compared to older versions. We now have the data source selection, which allows to pick not just a table or view, but we can also work with a SQL query, and we can use remote REST-enabled SQL, so remote Oracle databases, and we can also create forms on web sources or RESTful services. And I would like to build a form on top of a SQL query. And while I was preparing this office hours session, I was thinking, okay, which scenario should I use in order to show you the interesting stuff about a form region on a SQL query. So let's start with the very most simple example first, and that's none of these. So let's just create a form on the end table equals 10. So we will create a form on a subset of the end table, right? So that is the most simple thing. And form creation is pretty straightforward. We will be redirected to Page Designer for the report page. And here's our report. And I can edit this, not too spectacular, right? Of course, we can do some changes, save the changes. The first interesting bit is once we try to violate the where clause of our SQL query. And that's something where we make use of a database feature, right? We are trying to insert into a view, so to say, but the insert would violate the where clause. And the database has a concept for this for ages, right? In a view, you can create with check option, but you can also use that when updating a query. And so the form region, in this case, makes sure that we only stay within our sandbox, right? So that's one of the first interesting examples for the new form region when using a SQL query. But that's not all, of course. So let's play a bit more with SQL queries and forms. And the next scenario would be that we will want to store additional information for the employees, and we would like to have a new table for this. So let me quickly create the new table. And for the first example, I would initialize the additional information for each row of that new table with null. All right, so we can have a look into this. Right, so for each row of the emp table, we now have a row in the additional info table, and the comments, that's the only column for now is empty. Okay, so let's now try to create a form, and the form should allow us to enable both the emp table and the comment and the additional info, of course. So I have prepared this SQL query, and let's create another page. And how the form region works internally, how the anatomy is, we will get to this in a few minutes. First, let's walk a bit through these examples, right? Right, so again, we pick a SQL query. And as you've seen, this is one of the most important changes to the form region. That is this sort of new flexibility. Well, let me repeat that again. Until Apex 18.2, forms can be created on tables or views, and that's it. Right? Now we can have all sorts of flexibility. Right? So let me create that again. And we have our report now with no data found. We are in a database. And of course, there's data. Yeah, so as we would have expected, we have our emp data here and the comments table there, and this is done with a join. We can load the form, and we see pretty much the same in our form page. Let's now have a look into Page Designer, and let's have a look how the page looks like, right? And our form is now, and that's the big difference to previous versions, we now have a form region, right? And when you think about old form pages, that is a huge difference actually, because how did a form traditionally look like in Apex, right? What was a form? So let's remember that for a second. A form, that was a page. There was no form region in old Apex versions, right? It was a normal static HTML region, always. The static HTML region had page items, and in the page items, we declared the source as a database column. Nothing else, right? Just we declared in the page item P1 ename, for instance, we said, oh, this is the database column ename. And then we had a fetch and the DML process. And the fetch and the DML process both contained the table name and optionally a where clause. And when we loaded the form page, Apex looked into the process to get the table, primary key, and where clause. It looked into the page items to get the database column, and it built the select query based on this information. And the same is was for the DML process, right? It looked into the page items, into the DML process, collected everything together, database columns for page items, table name, primary key column, where clause, and then the SQL update statement was built. And for that reason, it's pretty obvious that one of the restrictions was you can have only one form per table because per page, because the page item just contains a database column. Apex did not maintain the relationship of one form item to one or the other DML process, right? It's just limited to one form per page. So all other region types in Apex work different, right? So when you have a report region, then the query, the data source, is part of the region. This applies to interactive grid, regions, charts, trees, calendar, whatever. All Apex always stores the data source at the region level. And so we thought forms should work similar, right? Forms should as well be focused on a specific region. The data source contains stored at the region level, and all other entities like the processes or the page items should reference the region which contains the data source. And the first good news is then the data source is stored only once. Let's have a look into this, right? We have our form region here with the SQL query we have provided. We have the process. There is an initialize process, and this does not contain a table anymore. This now contains a reference to the form region. And the same is true for the DML process. We have, again, a DML process, but there is no table anymore, no primary key information. It just references our form region, form 2 in this case. So, and based on this, it's actually pretty similar to how interactive grid works. In interactive grid, also the data source is stored at the region level, and the processes are referencing the region, right? In each page item, we again have a reference to the form region, and to see that, scroll down to the source section. And the page item now contains the reference to the form region. So this is the data source. And again, in that data source, the P5 ename column or the P5 ename column references the ename column. And it's the data type worker. We have information about primary key and query only declarative information. And I will talk about that maintain session state later on. Okay. So before trying this form out, I would like to make that comments query only and read only for now. Right? And the reason why I'm doing this will become clear in a few minutes, right? So let's try that form out. So let's now load the form and let's try to change something. Now, works, right? I can change Blake, and for the job title, this all works. And when this update was executed, it affected rows in the original table. Okay, what about the comments? So let's reverse that, right? So let's make that read write again. And for now, I would like to do those read only, right? Query only and read only. So, and it will all become clear in a few minutes, right? Again, we have those read only items. This is a comment. It also works, right? Okay, now I want to have the full thing. So let's enable all fields for read only. Again, let's now try to update something. And now, oh, we can see an error, right? And this is an important thing to keep in mind when working with this, right? Technically, Apex does not impose any limits here. Apex just allows you to provide any SQL query you want as the region source for your form region, as we did here, right? It can be even more complex. It could be even containing group by SQL, and the group by SQL example makes it pretty clear. Think about the SQL query had a group by expression. Would the form region be able to update this? No, probably not, right? Because there are some limits, and not imposed by Apex, but imposed by the database. So let's have a look. What does the form region actually execute? And this is our SQL query, this is our region source, right? I use this to copy to create the form region. So, and let me now just update the comments column, right, which is in this and additional info table. And it's important for me, for everybody to understand what's going on here, right? Because when you're working with the form region, you might run into these things and then you are asking what's going wrong here, right? And it's all actually pretty clear. So this works. And this is the same as I did before when I only updated the comments column. All right, let's do the same. Cell equals cell. Also works because the salary column is in the end table. In both cases, we updated one side of the join. So let's now update two sides. And we see exactly the same information. So that's actually a limitation of the core database. So if you want to update a join, if you want to update the result of a join, you can only update one side of the join, not two. That's the database imposes that limitation to us, and there is not much we can do, at least not declaratively. Of course, we will solve all of these things. But when we think about that, we might even do a bit more here, right? Because when I created that additional information table, I initialized it with a null value for each of the end rows. And actually, one would have to ask, is that really required? Actually not, right? So let me delete all this null data again. And now our additional info table is empty. Right? So we would now, if we run the report again, there is no data anymore. Table is empty. And of course, this is because it's a normal join. We don't see anything anymore. So let's create a new form region page. All right, and now we will be doing an outer join. That's our report 3, or form 3. And let's now use our outer join as the SQL query. Let's pick again a primary key. And again, we see our data again. Whenever we don't have a row in the additional information table, that column remains empty. Let's try to edit something. And of course, this will fail, right? Because same situation as before. And even now, the database can't do it on its own, because this is even an outer join, right? It would have to insert a row into the other table and update the row in the end table. That's nothing the database can do automatically. So we have to help here. And this gets us to the next part of the form region. So let's review the form page again. So we already have seen the actual form region with the SQL query. We have seen the page items. We have seen the initialize process, which loads the data. And we have seen that there is a DML process, which performs the actual update. And if you worked with Interactive Grid before, these settings should be familiar for you, right? So the target type region source is the default, and that's most declarative because Apex will use the region source SQL query and perform the update on that. With our outer join, that doesn't really work. So we need to do something else, right? We can, as for Interactive Grid, we could use a specific table of view, but that's not the right thing in this case because we need to update two tables. And the next thing, we could use PL SQL code as for Interactive Grid. And the help text looks similar to Interactive Grid. So we can provide our own PL SQL code, which actually performs the update. So let me paste in a bit of PL SQL code. And this will manage. Wait a moment. This did not copy well. There we go. So, and this piece of pure SQL code contains all the logic, right? It updates the M table, it updates the M additional info table, and based on a row already exists in the M additional info table, it creates it, it updates it, or it might even delete it, right? So let's run our page again. And let's update Blake again. This is a command. And there we go. Here is our Blake row with this is a comment. We can update the next one. Let's remove that. A second comment. And save that as well, right? And our M additional info table now contains just 2 rows, right? The rows for which comments are there, right? It's a clear outer join relationship, right? So, and we can remove a comment again. So let's also fix those names and job titles. And our clear SQL code will remove that row, right? So we now have some logic in place. We have a report on 2 tables. We have the form, which represents the same set of 2 tables. And we have some DML logic, which performs the insert, update, or delete. So you might now ask, that's all very nice, but I could have done the pure SQL stuff in older Apex versions as well, right? So why do I have to use the DML process of the form region? I could just add a normal pure SQL process to your to that page, which does the same thing. So where is the value of that form region? And you will now see that in a minute. Because when in the past, whenever you switched from the declarative form processes to custom pure SQL, you lost a very important thing, and that was the lost update. So let's run our page again. Let's load a row for clock. Right, we have that comment here, and let me now we have the typical situation. The employee number 1 loaded the form and went to the coffee break. So I will now, I'm employee number 2, working on the same business case and updating comments, updating the comment. So, and let me now, this is no comment anymore, right? And if I worked with just custom plain pure SQL processes without the form region and hit apply changes, my update would just go through, right? And the XXX from the other colleague would be overwritten. We would have a classic lost update detection. And that's because we switched from the declarative form DML process to our custom pure SQL logic. That was the big drawback of the old form region. Whenever you switched from the standard process to your custom pure SQL logic, you lost the lost update detection. And in a multi-user environment, lost update detection is important. Not so with the new form region, right? I can try it. And even with my own pure SQL logic in place, the form region still does lost update detection. It uses the form region query to perform lost update detection. And if the data changed somehow, I will notice that. And that's, in my opinion, one of the most important gains which you get with the new form region. You can use custom pure SQL code, and you keep the ability for lost update detection. You can even control it here. So if you're thinking you don't need that, right? Nobody needs lost update detection. You can turn it off. But I think in almost all the cases you will want to keep that on. And again, the big advantage of this is you prevent the lost update detection, which is a great feature of Apex. But you can still use your own custom logic to perform the actual DML operations. That's one of the most important things, right? Okay, there is a bit more. But let me, for now, get back to the slides. And let me recap what I demoed. So I created three new form pages for you. One with a very simple SQL query, which shows that you can't violate the SQL query's where clause with the form region, so that gives some level of protection. The next thing is when you're updating, when you perform actual updates, it depends on your SQL query, how updatable your form actually is, right? So simple SQL queries are actually always updatable. You don't need to do anything. Once joins get into the picture, even outer joins maybe, or if even aggregates come into the picture, you probably can't have fully declarative updates anymore. You probably need own PL/SQL logic to actually do the update there. But that's the same situation as for interactive grid. There is no difference. The database capabilities dictate what can be done out of the box, and for what you need additional PL/SQL code. Yeah, okay, let's have a look into the anatomy once more, right? As a repetition, as a wrap-up, earlier with the legacy form pages, I said it already, but there was not really a form region, right? A form consisted of one or more regions, page items, button, and the form fetch and DML processes. And the whole plethora made up the form page. And the data source was defined in process attributes, only tables and views were supported, and actually the metadata was duplicated, right? You had the table in the fetch process and the DML process. So if, for instance, if you had a where clause to provide, you needed to make sure that the where clause is provided for both the fetch and the DML processes. And in the new form region, the main difference is that the data source are now stored in the region source, as for any other Apex components. We can have table or view, SQL query, we have seen that. We can even have, and let me show that in Page Designer, we can even have a form based on a PL/SQL function body returning SQL query. So if you want to build a form which fetches and updates from different tables based on the current user context, you can have that today, right? So based on my tenant, which the current user is working on, you might have the form working on table employees _1, _2, or _ whatever, right? That's all possible. The flexibility is there. When you're using PL/SQL function body returning SQL query, the important thing is, as for interactive reports or for interactive grids, the column list, the list of selected columns must be stable, right? Because page items are mapped to those columns. So if we have the P7 job page item, but the query doesn't return a job column, the form has a problem, right? So the from and the where clause can be dynamic, but the select list must be stable, right? But within these boundaries, you can get a lot of flexibility with these variations of the data source, right? A page item, that's the next question you might have. So this was actually a very simple example, right? We have our form region. Now let's have a look into that again. This is our form region, and within the region we have our form, our 3 page items. What if I wanted to separate them out? So I would like to have another region, additional info, and I would like to have the comments in the additional info region. Question, does that still work? Let's try it out. There we go, right? So let's update that. Here we are. And let's also increase the salary. This guy now gets 5,000. And let's save that. And there is no difference, right? It just worked. And how does that go, right? Because we learned the data source is stored at the form region level. The page item references the database column. How did Apex manage that to still connect that P7 comments item to the form region? And the reason is that a page item now actually contains 2 region references. we have the layout part, and this contains the region where the item is actually displayed. And we have the source section, which references the data source region. So with the new form region, that's a takeaway. You can still distribute your items freely over the page. You can display them wherever you want. The only thing you need to maintain is to have in the source section the reference to the correct data source form region. That's the important thing. And layout-wise, place it wherever you want. Right? Okay, let's move on. Let's talk a bit about the DML process. And I already said that the DML process is very similar to the process for Interactive Grid. Indeed, Interactive Grid was a bit our role model when we built the form region. So after some discussion, we quickly came to the conclusion that we actually want to have the same configuration options as we have for Interactive Grid in the form region, right? So we wanted to have the switch to turn off or on lost update detection. We wanted to have the switch to turn on or off locked rows. We wanted to have the authorization and also the way to apply DML on region source, table of view, or custom PLC, as I just demoed, right? The lost update detection, I've shown that, and this slides again summarizes my favorite advantage of the new form region, and that's the ability to keep the lost update detection while using custom PLC code, right? Lock rows, that's sometimes possible, or that sometimes you need this if you are let's say working with a remote table, or a select for update statement is not possible for other reasons. So what does this lock row actually mean? So I think that's a very I think that is worth talking for 3 minutes about it. So what does lock row actually mean? We already have prevent lost updates, right? Does lock row mean the row is locked in the database when the form is loaded? So back to our demo. What does that mean? Is now the row locked in the database? No, of course not. We are in a web architecture here, right? We can't lock something in the database just because of a page has been loaded. Also, Apex is totally stateless, right? As soon as the page is rendered, all state is lost again. And also all logs would be released immediately. So what does lock rows mean, right? We are already catching lost updates with the lost update detection, right? If somebody else modifies the row, as we have seen, we will get an error message. So that is taken care of. What does lock row actually mean? So we are talking, when we are talking about locked rows, we are talking about that very tiny piece of time between the lost update detection, the successful lost update detection. So the row was fetched again, the checksum was compared, and now Apex is ready to perform the actual DML statement, right? But in that tiny slice of a second, right, lost update the checksum was fetched, and the update statement is executed. At that fraction of a second, somebody else could perform an update in exactly that tiny time frame, right? And especially to prevent that, we have that lock row equals yes. And that means when we perform lost update detection, Apex will execute a select for update. The row will be locked for that very short amount of time. Then the actual DML statement does the update. So in between, nobody was able to update the row, and finally commit is done and the page processing finishes, right? So sometimes you just can't do that select for update because you are selecting from a view using a database link or other stuff. This allows you to A, turn off that lock row, or to use custom PLC code to lock your row, right? So again, if you have a larger SQL query which joins and uses database links, you can just have some simplified stuff to lock the row here. And this allows you to customize your form DML process to almost every situation you have in your database schema. Okay, so much about the log rows. What else do we have? Finally, a few words about page items in the new form region. We already talked about the source settings. So we have the reference to the form region, we have the reference to the column and the data type. And I also showed the query only and primary key switches. At least one item must have the primary keys enabled. And there is this maintain session state, which I promised to talk about this. And when talking about the maintain session state thing, I would like to show you this screenshot of items of the old form pages, right? So we have the database column here, no data type, and then there is this used attribute. Everybody has seen this already, I'm pretty sure, right? Who of you actually knows exactly what this means and how this works in Apex? When I was talking to customers at conferences, I noticed there is a lot of confusion about this, right? You know, we can have a look into it in Page Designer as well. So let's have a live look into this. And with the form region, you don't see it. So, but if I remove that here and change it to database column, we see our used again, all right? And it could be only when current value in session state is null, or it could be that always replacing any existing value in session state. When you created a legacy form page with the create page wizard pre-Apex 19.1, you always got this one, right? If you add a page item manually to your page, you get this one, right? And actually, this has a consequence on how the page item is managed in Apex session state. So when a form page was loaded and an item has this setting, the item is loaded, but it's not stored in a database table. And you had these nice situations that you loaded your form page, you see all the form items with their values, then you click the session below and everything is empty, right? And there is actually a rationale behind this. And this is about when do we actually need to store the value of a page item persistently in session state. However, this was really always hard to understand. And so when building the form region, we decided to rename that to a maintain session state with two options, which are very explaining. And that says per request, memory only, or per session disk. What does that mean? That means when I load this form page, so let me cancel and load again, right? So now Ford 3000 and Analyst have been fetched from the database. And these are the values of our page items over here. And we see them, we see the items populated. However, these values are not stored persistently in session state. And we can easily see that this page has no items, this is empty, because it's not stored persistently in session state. Why is that? Well, because many forms are loaded and then cancelled, right? So I did not do any DML. And so if I now load the form again with another row, I have other values. And it's actually an optimization, right? It's an optimization not to store these values persistently into session state, just to keep them in memory while the page is rendered, and then they're lost, right? When I submit the page, the values will be submitted from the browser back to Apex and then processed. And for that reason, it's not available here. We can change this, right? So let's just, for fun, let's turn that over to per session disk. And let's now load the page again. It behaves exactly the same, right? There is no difference in between those two settings regarding functionality of your page. However, now you have your values here because they are now persistently stored in session state. When you think about your Apex instance as a whole, with hundreds of users loading hundreds of pages, right? And loading form pages without saving them, you can imagine that turning this back to per request actually saves load for your Apex instance, right? So this is actually an optimization which is beneficial for the Apex instance as a whole. Just the overhead of storing session state into tables is reduced, right? And if we know we don't need it, we can keep it that way. This has a few consequences, right? The goal is, of course, to reduce the load on your Apex instance as a whole. You won't see a difference if you're just looking into one form page, right? We are talking about inserting or updating 3 rows here. However, if you think about the database as a whole, with hundreds of forms, hundreds of applications, this becomes interesting. However, since our page items are not stored persistently in session state anymore, the page items to submit attribute, which you have under every region, becomes important now, right? So this is this attribute, and the rule of thumb is whenever you reference a page item in your query, always add that page item as page items to submit. I would use that as a rule of thumb. And then the browser makes sure that every session state is correctly submitted to the server, and the query always works with the latest state of your page items. Right? Okay, what else do we have? The last thing before wrapping up is the default handling of your form region items, and I would like to demo that as well. So let's what forms do we have here? Let's work with the salary, right? And I would now like to apply a default for the salary. So, and let me start with a default of the salary of 1,000. So, okay, let's now create a new row, right? And we have our default of 1,000 here. This is something like add something. Let's create that row. Okay, that is a mistake in my DML process. So let's work with existing rows, right? Rather than fixing this right now. We can immediately, let's fix that. But should be fixed, right? And this is done over let's do that later on. Okay, so let's work with an existing row just to show how the defaults work. We have seen when we load a new row, when we are creating a new row, nothing has been fetched from the database. The salary is initialized with 1,000, right? Let's now use an existing row. Of course, we have a salary here, and of course, the default is not applied here. So let me now clear that salary. Right, we now have Blake with a salary of null. If I now edit Blake, what do you think? Will we see a null salary, or will we see the default salary of 1,000? And if you're familiar with Apex forms and the legacy form pages, you would probably say, oh, we will see 1,000 because that was some sort of a default when null. And this changes with the form region, right? We don't see the default here, and that's intentional, right? Because the form region really distincts between differences between a new row being created and an existing row being updated. Defaults, an item default is actually item initialization. So the item initialization happens when we create a new row. We don't have a primary key. Everything, or we have clear page items, then all the page items are initialized with their defaults, and so we see the default of 1,000. However, when editing an existing row, then we are loading a row from the database. This has a null value here, and it's an existing row, so there is no need to apply a default. right? We just use what comes from the database. It's intentional behavior, and we think that's how the form should work, right? Old page items, so if there is no form region reference in your page items will behave as before, right? And this default behavior only applies if your page item actually references a form region, right? Then you will have the default only applied for new rows. And for that reason, by the way, that onload process is now the initialization process and not the fetch process. So this process is responsible for fetching existing rows or initializing new rows. And as always, you can drag that process around. Now, come on. So you can have it executed somewhere else, right? After region is maybe a bit bad, but I can have it after header. I can have it before regions, right? And you can, if you have other processes on your page and you want to have the initialize process for your form region executing at a very specific point of time, you can do it, right? Just place the process wherever it's most appropriate to run. Okay, final thing is about migration. When you upgrading your Apex instance from 18.something to 19.something or soon to 20.1, or when you importing an Apex application with legacy form pages into a 19.1 instance, what will happen to my existing form pages? Short answer, nothing, right? Existing form pages will continue to work as before, right? We will not, and that's important, I repeat that, Apex will not automatically do any migration of legacy form pages to the form region. You learned something about the new form region in the last hour. You have seen it's quite some difference in the way the form region works. The architecture is different. And so you can't automatically, silently migrate these things. So existing form pages will remain as they are. However, we have a migration assistant. So let me quickly install the sample database application, which still has a legacy form page. And that application shouldn't take too long to install. Shouldn't take too long to install. I'm pretty sure it's done soon. Come on. There we are. Okay, so if we have a look into that page, into that application. So, and this is an old, so let's assume this is our old application before the upgrade, or we imported that application. So then we can go to the utilities, and there is, as always, the upgrade application area. And the upgrade application area has the section upgrade legacy form page to page containing form region where appropriate. So, and we can navigate there, and it tells us page number 7, customer details, is a legacy form, form page. Let's verify that. And here we can see again how the old form region worked. We have a plain static content region over here. We have the legacy fetch process with the table and the primary key information. The legacy DML process is there, right? We have our page items, which have the type database column and the used, again, this confusing used. And let's now migrate that. And before doing that, please do a copy of your application and test it, right? You have learned default behavior is different, right? The architecture is different. There is a reason why we don't do this silently and automatically. If this would work every time, and we would guarantee that the form region you are migrating here works without problem after migration. If that was true, we would do it on our own during the Apex upgrade, right? Whenever we are sure that we can safely migrate something to the new architecture, we are doing it, right? If we are pushing that, if we are delegating this upgrade to you guys, then there is a reason, because we want you guys to test this beforehand. So in the real world, before doing that, please copy your application and upgrade the copy, and then test whether your form page still works. If you're, for instance, if you are depending on the old behavior of defaulting something, then you can't upgrade it to the new form region. And you don't have to, right? The old form pages are deprecated, but they will continue to run because there is such a large installed base. Legacy form pages with the old fetch processes and the old and the static region will probably work for the next years, right? And even longer, because that's just how it is. And but after migrating, we can see we have our form region, we have the processes migrated, right, to the initialization process, we have the DML process, and we have all the page items migrated to the new settings. They are referencing a form region now, have the data type, and have the maintain session state by default set to memory, right? But for this, again, for this migration, please test your pages before applying to the actual production version of your application. And there are even some form regions which the migration assistant can't migrate. These are those where, for instance, think about you have different tables in the fetch and DML processes. Apex would not know which table to choose, so we don't offer to upgrade these. Right? Some are even not able to be migrated. Okay, so that was a 50 minutes walk through the form region. I tried to cover almost all interesting areas. My recommendation for you is try it out and get familiar with the new form region. I'm pretty sure it has a lot of advantages, especially when it's about using custom PL/SQL or the flexibility you get with your data sources. Also the default behavior. I think all the areas we touched where we applied changes, we did this with the intention to have the form region more streamlined, more straightforward than the old form pages. So try it out. And this concludes what I have. And I'll be happy to answer a few questions now.
So, Carsten, there's some questions in the Q&A. The first one I'm going to ask is, do you think it's better using row ID rather than a primary key?
That's a question probably. So if people have time and the Zoom, we could extend the Zoom for 3 or 4 hours, then we can talk about that at length, I think. So primary key is of course, there is an advantage of row ID because the row ID is the physical pointer to the actual row in the database. And the row ID, for that reason, saves the index lookup. So that's the plain technical argument for row IDs. You can just save the index lookup, which you need if you use primary key. For primary key, you need to look into the index. The index returns the pointer to the row, and then you can access the row. On the other hand, row IDs can change. So as soon as you start bookmarking links to specific rows, and the row ID is part of your Apex URL, and the DBA comes along and says, oh, this table needs to go to another table space, so let me quickly do this, alter table move to table space something else, then all your row IDs become invalid. All right. Row IDs are also have limitations once you again have join views or you're using form on a SQL query. So the SQL query might have an aggregation again, or you have some complex joins. Then a row ID is sometimes not available. So yes, a row ID is sometimes a bit more efficient than using a primary key. But what the real answer to this question is, that depends on your project. It's the typical answer everybody hates. It depends, right?
Okay, I've got one more for you. We're running out of time. But earlier on, you were demonstrating where you had multiple tables. And the question is, instead of modifying the automated processing code, could you instead base the form on a view which has an instead of trigger, which
Of
handles
course.
the insert?
Of course, you can do that. The view instead of trigger would be the other choice. And I've frequently seen customers doing that with the old form pages where you could just provide a table or a view name. And then one of the standard approaches to keep lost update detection while executing my custom logic for the actual DML. So let's create a view with an instead of trigger. The instead of trigger then executes the DML, and for Apex it looks like a table. And views with instead of trigger have a few tiny technical limitations, but these don't apply to everybody. But that's right, it's actually a choice, which adds in here as well. So now you have multiple choices to do it. Work with view instead of trigger, work with directly on the data source, work with custom PL SQL as part of your DML process. You can really decide which one is the best approach for you.
Thank you, Carsten. We're at the top of the hour.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening. And if somebody else has questions, feel free to ask them on the Apex OTN forum. Contact me on Twitter. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I did, and see you next time.